What if the frail old couple everyone dismisses, the ones with dirt under their fingernails and a stoop in their backs, were not merely gardeners? What if the quiet, unassuming grandparents your family scorns as a burden, were once the most feared strategists the world of shadows had ever known? Arthur and Clara lived in the gentle rhythm of the seasons. Their world was the small cottage at the edge of their son's sprawling property, a home conceded to them with the grudging sigh of familial duty. Their hands, gnarled and spotted with age, were architects of life, coaxing roses from stubborn soil and nursing ailing herbs back to fragrant health. To their granddaughter, 7-year-old Sophie, they were magic. Arthur, with his quiet, steady presence, could mend any broken toy with a patient touch and a story about the wood remembering its life as a tree. Clara, whose smile seemed to hold the warmth of 1,000 suns, baked cookies that tasted of love and whispered secrets to the finches that ate from her palm. But to their son, Richard, and his wife, Amelia, they were relics. They were a constant, visible reminder of a simpler, poorer past Richard had fought to escape. They were the faded photograph in the gleaming, minimalist gallery of his life. His parents' worn sweaters and Clara's patched apron were a source of deep, burning shame whenever he and Amelia hosted their affluent friends. Their kindness was mistaken for weakness, their wisdom for senility. "They're just there," Amelia would complain, her voice a sharp, polished weapon. "Always watching. Taking up space. That cottage could be a guest house. A proper one. For investors." Richard, a man whose spine was forged from ambition and alloyed with his wife's disdain, would nod. The weight of their existence felt like a stone in his tailored pocket, dragging him down. He saw their love for Sophie not as a gift, but as an infection of sentimentality he needed to quarantine from his daughter's future. The plan was born of this cold resentment, whispered in the dark of their king-sized bed. A special trip, a final, beautiful day out for his parents, a drive to the country to see the autumn leaves. A gesture of kindness that would mask the ultimate cruelty. They presented the idea over a tense Sunday dinner, the lie sliding smoothly from Richard's tongue. "We thought you'd enjoy it. Just the two of you. A little getaway before winter sets in." Clara's eyes, the color of faded periwinkles, lit up with a rare, hopeful light. She looked at Arthur, who gave a slow, measured nod. He saw the hollowness in his son's eyes, the flicker of something sharp and cold behind the feigned warmth, but for Clara's sake, he agreed. He had long ago learned to read the shifting weather in people, and a storm was gathering in his own bloodline. The morning of the trip, Sophie hugged them tight, her small arms a vice around their waists. "Bring me back a pretty leaf, Grandma," she whispered into Clara's dress. "The reddest one you can find." Clara kissed the top of her head, her heart aching with a love so fierce it was a physical pain. "I will, my darling. I promise." Arthur gently squeezed his granddaughter's shoulder, a silent vow passing between them. As they settled into the back of Richard's luxury sedan, the leather cool and impersonal against their skin, they watched their little cottage recede. They saw Sophie standing on the porch, a small, waving figure framed by the climbing roses they had planted decades ago. They were leaving their whole world behind, and a deep, ancient instinct, long dormant, began to stir within them. The drive was long and suffocatingly silent. Amelia tapped at her phone, her face illuminated by its cold, blue light, while Richard focused on the road, his jaw set like granite. They drove past charming towns and rolling hills, deeper and deeper into the wilderness where the asphalt gave way to gravel and the trees grew thick, their branches interlocking like a cage. The forest was a cathedral of gold and crimson, beautiful and deeply indifferent. Richard finally pulled over on a remote, unpaved logging trail, miles from any discernible landmark. "Here we are," he announced with false cheer. "The air is so fresh. Why don't you two get out, stretch your legs? We'll just turn the car around." Arthur's gaze swept the surroundings. He noted the position of the sun, the direction of the faint breeze, the type of trees, pine, oak, maple. He registered the lack of any trail markers, the silence unbroken by distant traffic. It was a place chosen for its anonymity, for its ability to swallow things whole. Clara took his hand, her grip surprisingly firm. She understood. There was no betrayal left in her heart, only a vast, cold sorrow for the son she had raised and the man he had become. They stepped out of the car. The forest floor was soft with a carpet of fallen leaves. Richard and Amelia remained inside. "We brought you a small picnic," Amelia said, her voice strained, pushing a small basket and 2 bottles of water out of the door. "Enjoy the day." Before they could respond, the door clicked shut. The engine roared to life, gravel spitting from under the tires. The car executed a tight, brutal turn and sped away, its red tail lights vanishing into the dense woods like malevolent eyes. And then, there was only silence. The profound, pressing silence of a place that had no memory of them. Arthur and Clara stood together, 2 small, elderly figures dwarfed by the ancient trees. They were alone. Abandoned. Left to the mercy of the wilderness. But as the sound of the engine finally faded, a change came over them. Arthur straightened his back, the weary stoop of 80 years vanishing in an instant. His eyes, once clouded with the gentle haze of age, sharpened to a piercing clarity. He was no longer a frail gardener, he was a sentinel. Clara's expression, soft with grandmotherly love just moments before, hardened into a mask of serene, formidable resolve. She scanned the forest not with fear, but with the cool, appraising gaze of a field commander surveying the terrain. This wilderness was not their tomb. It was their element. Far away, nestled in the canopy of a towering pine a quarter-mile distant, a man lowered a pair of high-powered binoculars. Elias watched the luxury sedan retreat down the trail. His face was a roadmap of scars and wrinkles, his eyes holding the weary patience of a lifelong guardian. He had followed them, just as he had for the past 30 years, a silent shadow sworn to an old oath. He had seen the betrayal unfold, and a cold fury burned in his chest. His first instinct was to intervene, to descend upon the feckless son and deliver a swift, final lesson in loyalty. But then he refocused his lenses on the 2 figures standing in the clearing. He saw Arthur's shift in posture, saw Clara's head tilt as she tasted the air. He saw them turn to each other, not in panic, but in a silent, perfect communion of strategy that he recognized from a lifetime ago. A slow, grim smile touched Elias's lips. No, they didn't need his help. Not yet. The forest hadn't trapped them. It had just set them free. Arthur knelt, his fingers brushing the damp earth. "North," he said, his voice a low, gravelly timbre that had lost its elderly waver. "The stream is to the northwest. We'll have water within the hour." Clara nodded, her gaze fixed on the dense undergrowth. "The nights will be cold. We need shelter. There should be a rock outcropping along the ridge 2 clicks east of the stream. It will provide cover from the wind." They moved without another word, their steps sure and economical. They were not the shuffling, careful couple who needed handrails and frequent rests. They moved with a fluid, predatory grace that belied their age. Arthur used a fallen branch as a walking staff, testing the ground, his eyes scanning for tracks, for resources, for threats. Clara gathered edible plants and dry tinder with an expert's efficiency, her mind a flawless encyclopedia of botany and survival. They were not just gardeners, they were cultivators of a different sort, accustomed to making the inhospitable yield to their will. They were the weavers, a name whispered in the deepest corridors of power and fear 3 decades ago. Arthur was the strategist, the one who saw every thread of a situation. Clara was the operator, the one who could manipulate those threads into a tapestry of victory or a shroud of defeat. They had vanished, trading a world of secrets and violence for scraped knees, bedtime stories, and the simple, profound love of a grandchild. They had done it to protect their son from the blowback of their former lives, to give him a clean slate. And he had just thrown it all away. Back in the city, Richard and Amelia toasted their newfound freedom with expensive champagne. The house felt gloriously empty, cleansed of the cloying scent of old books and Clara's baking. "To us," Richard said, clinking his flute against his wife's. "To a future without," complications. The complication they had so cruelly disposed of was the final obstacle to a lucrative, if morally dubious, deal. Richard was courting a ruthless corporate raider named Sterling, a man known for dismantling companies and salting the earth where they once stood. Sterling was interested in Richard's tech firm, but his due diligence was invasive. He had expressed a cold curiosity about Richard's dependent parents, seeing them as a potential liability, a loose end. By casting them off, Richard believed he was demonstrating the same ruthless pragmatism that Sterling so admired. He was proving he was a man unburdened by sentiment, a true player in the cutthroat world he longed to join. In her bedroom, Sophie clutched the stuffed rabbit her grandfather had mended for her. Her parents had told her that Grandma and Grandpa had gone on a long, surprise holiday. But a cold knot of anxiety tightened in her stomach. Her grandparents would never have left without a proper goodbye, without a long hug and a promise to call. She looked out her window toward the small, dark cottage, its windows like vacant eyes. The climbing roses on the porch seemed to droop, as if they too felt the absence of the hands that had tended them with such care. She missed them with an ache that was sharp and real, a child's unerring instinct that something was terribly wrong. In the forest, as dusk painted the sky in shades of bruised purple and orange, Arthur and Clara found the rock outcropping exactly where Clara had predicted. It was a shallow cave, dry and defensible. Within minutes, they had a small, smokeless fire crackling to life in its deepest recess, a skill from 1,000 nights spent in hostile territory. They were a team, their movements synchronized by decades of absolute trust. As they shared the wild berries Clara had gathered, Arthur looked at his wife, her face illuminated by the flickering firelight. The lines of age seemed to recede, revealing the fierce, intelligent woman he had fallen in love with in a world of lies. "He has no idea what he's done, does he?" Clara said, her voice soft but laced with steel. "He thinks he's cut the final thread to his past." Arthur stared into the flames. "He's done more than that," he replied, his tone grim. "He's just pulled a thread that could unravel everything." And everyone, from his vantage point, Elias watched the faint glow of their fire. He saw their discipline, their lack of panic, their seamless cooperation. His respect for them, already immense, deepened. But his surveillance had picked up something else. Since Richard's return to the city, new eyes had appeared around his estate. Men in dark suits, driving nondescript cars, their methods subtle but professional. They weren't watching Richard, they were watching his house, his daughter. They belonged to Sterling. Elias knew of Sterling. The man's corporate empire was a front, a legitimate face for an old and vicious syndicate, a rival organization the Weavers had nearly dismantled 30 years ago. Sterling wasn't just a businessman, he was a vengeful ghost from their past. Richard, in his blind ambition, hadn't just made a business deal. He had stumbled into a trap, offering up his own family as bait to a predator who had been hunting his parents for decades. The trap was closing, and Sophie was right in the middle of it. The next day, Richard's deal reached its climax. He met Sterling in a sterile, top-floor boardroom overlooking the city. The contracts were laid out, the culmination of all his soulless striving. He signed his name with a flourish, a triumphant smile on his face. But Sterling didn't countersign. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, his eyes as cold and dead as a shark's. "There's just one final piece of business, Richard," Sterling said, his voice a silky menace. "Your parents. You said you took care of that liability. Tell me how." A chill slithered down Richard's spine. He stammered, recounting the story of the trip to the country, framing it as a necessary, pragmatic decision. Sterling listened, a faint, predatory smile playing on his lips. When Richard finished, Sterling slowly shook his head. "You fool," he hissed. "You thought they were a liability? They were your protection. Their obscurity was the only thing keeping you alive." The doors to the boardroom burst open. Sterling's men, the same ones Elias had spotted, entered the room, weapons drawn. Amelia, who had been waiting in an outer office, was dragged in, her face pale with terror. Your parents, Sterling sneered, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper, were known as the Weavers. They cost my organization an empire. I've spent 30 years searching for them. And you, in your pathetic greed, just led me right to their doorstep. Or at least, you've cleared the way to the one thing they still care about, he gestured to one of his men. Bring me the girl. Richard's world collapsed. The names, the implications, the sudden, horrifying clarity, it was too much to comprehend. He looked at Amelia's terrified face and thought of Sophie, his innocent daughter, and the monstrousness of his actions crashed down upon him. He had not just abandoned his parents, he had sentenced his own child. In the forest, Elias knew he could wait no longer. The moment for observation was over, the time for action had come. He moved through the woods with the silence of a ghost, arriving at Arthur and Clara's camp. He didn't call out. He simply stood at the edge of the clearing until Arthur's head snapped up, his eyes instantly locking onto the familiar figure. There was no surprise, only a grim acceptance. Elias, Arthur said, his voice a low rumble. It's been a long time, not long enough, old friend, Elias replied, stepping into the firelight. He wasted no time on pleasantries. It's Sterling. He has Richard and Amelia. And he's going for Sophie. The name, Sterling, hung in the air like poison. Clara rose to her feet, her face a mask of cold fury. The gentle grandmother was gone, replaced by a matriarchal predator whose cub was threatened. In that instant, the transformation was absolute. The weight of years fell away, replaced by the lethal poise of their former lives. Their movements became crisp, their gazes sharp and analytical. They were the Weavers again, resurrected by their son's greed and an old enemy's vengeance. Our protocols? Clara asked, her voice devoid of all emotion save for a chilling resolve. The cache is still in place, Elias confirmed. Untouched. Sterling's network is arrogant. They're using standard commercial communications, lightly encrypted. They think you're dead and gone. Arthur's mind was already working, spinning the threads, seeing the patterns. He won't harm the boy or his wife yet. Their leverage. His target is Sophie. He wants to draw us out. He wants a confrontation. He turned to Clara, their eyes meeting in a silent exchange that conveyed volumes of strategy and shared history. He'll get one. The rescue was not an assault, it was a dissection. They didn't use brute force, they used knowledge, precision, and fear. From the hidden cache Elias had maintained, a small, weatherproof container buried beneath the roots of an ancient oak, they retrieved not weapons, but their true arsenal, a satellite phone, a sophisticated decryption device, and a set of old ledgers containing the secrets of Sterling's organization, its weaknesses, its betrayals, its hidden skeletons. While Elias established a perimeter around Richard's estate, protecting Sophie from any immediate physical threat, Arthur and Clara went to work. From the heart of the forest, they became ghosts in Sterling's machine. Clara's fingers, which had so recently tended to rose bushes, now flew across the keys of the decryption device. She peeled back the layers of Sterling's security with the ease of a master surgeon, her mind navigating the digital pathways she herself had helped design decades ago. Arthur, using the sat phone, began to pull the threads. He made 3 calls. The first was to a retired banker in Zurich, awakening a dormant financial protocol that began to bleed Sterling's offshore accounts dry. The second was to a disgruntled former lieutenant of Sterling's, now living in hiding, offering him a path to revenge and a clean slate. The third call was the most devastating. It was to Sterling's own second-in-command, feeding him irrefutable proof, gleaned from the ledgers, that Sterling was planning to betray him. He didn't just create chaos, he directed it, turning Sterling's own network against itself with a few carefully chosen words. Inside the boardroom, Sterling's phone began to ring incessantly. Reports of financial ruin, internal mutiny, and collapsing alliances flooded in. His empire was crumbling in a matter of hours. His expression shifted from smug triumph to disbelief, then to raw, primal fear. He looked at Richard and Amelia, cowering on the floor, and finally understood. He hadn't trapped the weavers. They had trapped him. The final move was Clara's. She located Sterling's position through his own security network and made a direct, untraceable call to his phone. When he answered, her voice came through, not as a frail old woman, but as the calm, chilling specter of his past. "You threatened our granddaughter, Mr. Sterling," she said, her tone as cold and sharp as ice. "You have miscalculated. Release our son and his wife. Walk away from what is left of your life. This is your only warning." The sheer, unexpected terror of hearing that voice, the voice of a ghost he thought long buried, broke him. He stared at his captives, no longer assets but the source of his utter destruction. He ordered his men to release them and fled, a ruined man running from shadows he could never hope to outpace. Richard and Amelia stumbled out of the building, blinking in the harsh daylight, their minds shattered. They saw their car, and standing beside it, their parents. Arthur and Clara were no longer in their simple, worn clothes. They wore practical, dark attire provided by Elias. They stood tall, emanating an aura of quiet, unassailable authority that was more terrifying than any weapon. The look in their eyes was not of anger or relief, but of a profound, soul-deep disappointment. There was no hug, no comforting word. There was only the cold, hard finality of judgment. "You will leave," Arthur said, his voice flat and absolute. "You will not contact Sophie. You will not come near this family again. The life you knew is over. What you do with the ruin you have made is your own concern." He tossed a single car key onto the pavement. "Go." Richard and Amelia, stripped of their wealth, their status, and their family, drove away in shame and terror, finally understanding that the two people they had despised as weak and irrelevant were the pillars that had held up their entire world. The aftermath was quiet. Sterling's organization, devoured by its own internal strife, ceased to exist. Richard and Amelia vanished into obscurity, their names erased from the ledgers of both high society and the shadow world. Arthur and Clara returned to their cottage, to their garden. Elias, his oath fulfilled, melted back into the shadows, though they knew he would always be watching. They stepped inside the small, familiar home, the scent of dried lavender and old wood welcoming them. Nothing had changed, and yet, everything had. The secret they had carried for so long was no longer a burden, but a tool they had used one last time to protect what mattered. Sophie ran to them the moment she saw them, her face a mess of joyful tears. She threw her arms around them, burying her face in Clara's dress. "You came back," she cried. "You brought me a leaf." Clara smiled, a true, warm smile that reached her eyes for the first time in days. She pulled a perfect, crimson maple leaf from her pocket and handed it to the little girl. "I promised, my darling." As the sun set, they sat in their garden. Arthur was pruning the roses, his touch once again gentle and patient. Clara was telling Sophie a story, her voice soft and loving. To the world, they were once again just a quiet, elderly couple. But a new strength radiated from them, a peaceful certainty. They were no longer hiding from their past, they had made peace with it. Sophie looked from her grandfather's steady hands to her grandmother's serene face, and for the first time, she saw not frailty, but an immense, unshakable power. She finally understood the magic she had always sensed. It wasn't in the mended toys or the whispered secrets to birds. It was in them. They were her home, her protectors, her legends. And in the quiet twilight of their lives, the weavers had finally found their truest, most lasting peace.